I'll send you the invoice for the background.
Yeah, I was surprised you had a royal one the other day. I didn't say anything.
I could see the look of dissent in your face. So, I had to course correct. So, take it as this being the making amends.
We don't have any royalties yet, so you're lucky.
Cool. All right. Charlotte, we good to go?
Yeah, we good to go. Thanks, Rob.
Okay, cool. Let's get cracking. Right, good morning, guys. Welcome everyone to what I'm very excited about, because this is right up my alley when it comes to content and I guess where we're going as clubs. So I'm very excited to be able to share perhaps a little bit of our journey so far with regards to podcasting and I guess some insight into what it's done both for our business but also for the clients that we work with in terms of creating content. So that's really what today is about. And of course, it is an Ask Us Anything podcast, a webinar. And for that reason, please feel free to jump in, guys, at any time. I think it's always good perhaps to ask the question in the moment, or if you do want to leave it for at the end, by all means. But it is meant to be an interactive one. So yeah, please jump in. Maybe you've come to this with some questions. If you feel that you want to ask at any time, please feel free to do so. I think just, to get things going, one of the most exciting things about where digital is going and where content is going is we really are in a content age where, if you think about it, at your disposal, whether it's on your phone, whether it's on your television set, we have no shortage of information. I mean, I was just talking to Robbie before we started about, the golf content and the instruction. It's incredible to see what content there is available to us, literally, well, to some extent free of charge. And I think taking advantage of that and making an impact on people is becoming more challenging because of the amount of content. But at the same time, we've all got a unique story to tell. And I think the medium of podcasting really enables us, more than anything, guys, to give insight into the characters, the nuances of what your club is all about. So that's really what I'm going to unpack quite briefly this morning. And yes, some of us do have content marketing plans. Some of us are not quite there yet, but are moving in that direction. And I think when it comes to something like this, to simplify it for the purposes of today, it's a very, very important thing that we don't just create content for the sake of creating content. We don't just have a podcast for the sake of having a podcast. Like anything in the world, you can't just create an app and think people are going to download the app. It's got to serve a purpose and it's got to be compelling and rich. If you think about the things that you watch, whether it's on Netflix, whether it's on DSTV, whether it's the podcast perhaps that you listen to, there's a specific reason why you choose to listen to those. And I think it's always good to start with the customer hat in mind. Shock horror that I'm preaching customer centricity, but the reality is that we have to think with the customer's hat in mind, and do they want to listen to that? Are they going to see value in that? And I think that's a great question to always ask, especially when we talk just now about the strategy behind the content itself. So to take us a little bit back in time, I'd like to know whether you might be dating yourself like I am right now, but I want to see if you remember this time in our lives when Mnet was the main source of content, and perhaps the decoder, which you see on the left, was the conduit through which we could actually watch something, not on our own time, but when someone else decided when we were going to watch that content. So you take something like Carte Blanche, for example, at a certain time on a Sunday evening, you either watched it or you missed it. And it was very difficult, if you didn't tape it, to watch it again. Where have we moved to? It's an incredible thing to think that today, whether it's your Netflix account, whether it's your Spotify platform, whatever the case might be, you have this amazing plethora of content that you have at your disposal. Now, what is also incredible is if you look at the right-hand image, together with anyone in the world, your club's logo and your club's podcast could sit in someone's feed regardless of the fact that you have X amount of budget to spend on your marketing versus someone like Joe Rogan, who earns $30 million a year for his podcast. So it's an amazing opportunity to sit hand in hand or side to side with some of the most prolific content creators in the world, based on the fact that your member chooses to listen to your podcast. So it's an amazing and an incredibly effective medium, a versatile medium to really touch the consciousness. And I think I want to emphasize that word consciousness when it comes to the role of a podcast today. It's so difficult to get people's full attention on one thing today because of all the distraction. Now, the amazing thing about a podcast, for example, is that when I finish this webinar, I've got to go to a client today in Franschhoek, and I've got 45 to 50 minutes to spend. What am I going to be doing in that time? I'm going to be listening to a podcast to fill that time in a constructive way, right? Your member will be driving from A to B at some point. How are they going to fill that time? Well, there's an opportunity for them to connect with a club, right? And that can be done through a podcast. Can they watch a YouTube video during that time? Can they look at your Facebook feed during that time? Well, the correct answer is no, although we do know some people are a little bit dodgy with phones in cars. But certainly the most safest way and the most conscious way to do it is through a podcast. And I think that opportunity in itself is one that we should really think about leveraging as best as we can. So just one or two stats just to show you the relevance and perhaps the justification behind it. What is fantastic about podcasts, and as you would assume, is that it really has been kicked off by perhaps what we call the younger generation. But that age gap is also increasing. So up to 67% of total podcast listeners globally are between 18 and 44 years old. Now, obviously, what we're always trying to do within the club is we're trying to make sure of our succession plan. We're trying to make sure that, who's the future member, and really to captivate their attention and their connection to the club. Podcasting is, again, a fantastic medium to be able to achieve that. Not only from an age perspective, but what's interesting is also from a gender perspective, the mix across the board is quite evenly spread in terms of whether it's male or female who listen to podcasts. So again, we want to attract in equal measure those different types of members, potential members, and podcasting is a great way to do that. And then, what is also interesting is, what is the conduit? What is the platform through which we mainly use or access podcasts? And of course, as everything else is moving to mobile, so does podcasting. And for those of you who've listened to podcasts before, for those of you who listen to podcasts, you will know that it's incredibly easy to access them via your mobile phone. The barrier to entry, and this is one of the main attractions about podcasting as a listener, is that it's so easy to access, right? Once you subscribe to a channel, once you've subscribed to a podcast provider, you can literally get notified straight away when they release new content. In much the same way that your member has to do nothing if they are notified or if they are subscribed to your podcast that you've got a new one out. So really, once it's there and once you've got that captive audience going, and we've noticed this with our podcast, is that people look forward to the next episode because you've created that integrity, you've created that willingness to want to listen to what the next episode will be. And what's also important to know is that you might be thinking, well, there are so many podcasts out there. How do we get our share of the pie? How do we get our segment of the consciousness? And what's interesting is that an average listener listens up to 7 different shows per week, right? And that's on the conservative level. So what's important to note there is the fact that don't be perturbed by the fact that there are many people doing podcasts already. It is the fastest, literally by statistic, it is the fastest growing medium globally and by far the fastest growing medium in South Africa. So I just wanted to kind of bring it back to the clubs and understand what is the purpose of it for clubs, right? What is the purpose of it? Why would we even want to think about it for the purposes of a club as we find ourselves in this environment? So I think first and foremost, it's the opportunity to connect with your members and your visitor base by adding value through the content medium. And funny enough, something that Darren said to me a day or two ago, and I agree with him wholeheartedly, is the fact that we've got a great opportunity to add another layer of value to our members especially, but to prospective members as well through content, right? And what I mean is not just generalized content, not just stuff that kind of, is there for the sake of being there, but content that makes people conscious and thinking about what the club means to them, what value looks like to them, and what is important to them. So podcasting there is a fantastic opportunity to achieve that. And then secondly, from a purpose perspective, it's to portray the club's attributes and offerings to prospective golfers and also to corporate clients. What's been incredible for us as a company is that we've had, calls, interest from Sweden, from Germany, from any corner of the globe you can think of, because they listened to an episode that resonated with them. They dug a little bit deeper and they wanted to know what we do, and as a result we started building a relationship from there. And if I think about the cost of the podcast and the value that we've already derived out of it, the word no-brainer doesn't do justice to what it's done for us as a business. And I think what it will do to a club in the sense of what it brings in terms of consciousness, and from consciousness, further interest in what the club has to offer. So just to sum up very quickly, why podcasts? First and foremost, as I said, podcasts are the most fast-growing media format globally. So not just are we in a good space now, but we're trending in the right direction as well. It's not something that's becoming a white elephant. It's not something that's going to go away. It's only going to increase in its popularity and relevance. Podcasts are accessible, and I think that's the key thing to also remember, is that we're in an age where accessibility is everything. If there's red tape, if there's a difficult element to get in touch with it, people go somewhere else. So it certainly does tick that box. Podcasts also allow the listener to multitask. And I think today, if you think about your life, you want to always try and be doing at least one or two things at the same time, purely because we just don't have enough time to do everything, in singular kind of formats. So that opportunity for your listeners is fantastic. Podcasts help, if nothing else, to build a community. And I think that's something we're all trying to do in the clubs. We're all trying to build a community where people are like-minded, or they have a similar set of beliefs. And, I can't tell you how many clubs have come to me over the last 6 months and have said, how do we get our committees to think more aligned? How do we get members to see things more progressively and more positively in where we're going? I can tell you right now that podcasts are a great way to prime people. And when I say prime people, I mean to get them to actually think in a certain way for the right reasons. And then lastly, as I said before, podcasts are incredibly cost effective if you compare them against the likes of video or other costs in terms of marketing exercises. And the thing I just want to emphasize there is that podcasts are more about organic growth than paid media. So we've done this exercise for 3 years now, where we've actually on purpose not spent money on advertising our podcast, because we wanted to see the organic growth of it. And I think if you create content in the right way, in a quality way, you get the organic growth that allows you to make it worthwhile and value for money. So you've already got a captive audience, if you guys think about it, which is your member base. But off that member base is an extended network, which you can also tap into. So I think you're in a fantastic place to already leverage that network in a way through podcasting. And then obviously as that grows in terms of popularity, you're going to see the future benefits of that as well. So just to get into it in a more tactile sense, is how do you go about starting a podcast, right? What are the starting points, and how do you kind of start conceptualizing and getting into it? So, I'm not the first person to tell you this, but, content really is king. And I think, I've seen wonderful apps being developed. I've seen fantastic podcasts in terms of quality being put out, but they didn't really serve a proper purpose, or they didn't really speak to the audience. So I think first and foremost, you've got to think about what that story and what that narrative is that you have to tell when it comes to your club. So a couple of ideas that I put together just to share with you this morning are things that I'll share with you now. So one of the things which I always find fascinating about a club are the characters, the individuals that form part of the team. Now, I think, and I believe, and please correct me if you disagree, but I honestly believe that a lot of members don't get the opportunity to truly understand who the characters of the club are. And yes, there are some individuals that promote themselves better than others, and members become familiar with those. But what I've noticed in some of the clubs that we work with is that when you put the stories of the people out on platforms like this, and you get members to know who they really are, when you get the opportunity to tell that story in a more professional way, people have a lot more time and a lot more empathy for the staff and the individuals who you form part of your team. So we've done a segment with one club quite recently where we started to tell the story of the individuals who form part of the team, so that the members can connect with those individuals, so that the public out there can connect with those people, so that when they see them on the floor in the restaurant, or when they see them on the first tee, they know something more about them than just what is on face value in those few seconds of interaction. Podcasting as a segment in the podcast, it's a fantastic way to give people insight into what's happening in the club. Now, one thing that I'm sure you've had an issue with is you send out a newsletter, you send out a communication, maybe another format of what's happening in the club, and some member rocks up to your office and says, I didn't know that was happening. I had no idea that was happening on that day. And you're like, how? How is it possible that you didn't? And the problem is not that the information is not there. The problem, ladies and gents, is consciousness. They are not conscious about reading that newsletter. And again, I'm going to sound like a broken record today, but that is the true value of something like this. It's a novelty, of course, and that's a good thing to start with. But it's also something which adds another layer to that consciousness, and that's really, really important. So whether it's what's happening at the club, whether it's events that are coming up, whether it's getting people excited about the event, right, and getting buy-in to the event, there is another way that you can market and sell that to your captive audience, or perhaps even beyond that. A great opportunity as well, and something which we're trying very hard with our clients to do, is this cross-pollination, understanding between departments, and also showing that there's value across different elements of the experience. So podcasting, again, speaking to the people who are the experts in that department and having a little segment, whether it's 2 or 3 minutes in the podcast, to actually ask them what's happening in food and beverage, what's going on in, with golf operations in this month, what can we look forward to, etc., etc. And that's really, again, a fantastic layer for your members. And then, like I said, an element of narrative that really tells the story of the club. I think if I look back at the histories of your various clubs, if I look back at what's happened over time, you've got a wonderful story to tell. And we need to find a medium to be able to do that in a linear fashion, and also just to have the episodic kind of ability to tell that one episode to the next. And then something which we've done also with some of our clients is to have a special guest. So, for example, if you've got a member who is someone of notoriety, or someone who is respected, even not necessarily someone who is well known, but someone who's got a good respect amongst the community, to bring them in to get their perceptions about the club, right? To get that understanding of why they are a member of the club. It's a wonderful way and an authentic way of providing that content to your community. And then one last suggestion is we've also done something called member achievements, which is something where, for example, what we did is we look at the scores that come through every month, and someone who's shot a fantastic net score, or someone who's just played out of their boots and played incredibly well, is to give them that sense of significance on the platform for a short little part of the episode, where we ask them, how did it go? What happened? What did you do differently? And it's incredible to see the goodwill that comes from that, because you're making them feel part of the club. You're giving them that platform to really feel proud of what they've achieved, and they attach that feeling of proudness to the club, which creates longevity and the relationship. So just some ideas there around the content, and we try and unpack that with our clients as much as possible to really see what's a fit for the club, and what's gonna be the most value, most importantly, to your listenership. Some of the things which are really, really important, and I see quite a variance in this from some clubs that have already tried to do some podcasting, and I try and understand why things work and why they don't. And one of the things which is really important to remember is that the way that you record your podcast often determines a lot of the success. So the first thing to mention here is that sound quality is everything, right? If I'm recording something on a speaker mic on my phone, right, and I'm putting this out there, it's kind of like putting out a waiter without an apron, putting out weights into thing with a shirt that has got no alignment to what you're trying to promote as a brand. So the quality of the sound creates the captive audience. The sound quality creates the willingness to listen longer. And ultimately, what you want to do is you want people to listen to the full episode. Another thing which is so important is to do the prep work before the time. So when we do our interviews you might have listened to some of our episodes, whether it be a general manager, whether it be someone who's a CEO of a company, what I always do before the time is I will send them a list of questions so that they can actually prepare what they're going to talk about. Because what I find, and I've done this as an exercise, when you just put someone behind a mic and you say, tell me what you think or how are things going, you get a lot of umming and ahhing and the problem with that is that you put that out as an episode, and the ums and ahs and the more it sounds laborious, the more people sort of detach from listening to it. So you want to kind of set yourself up for success, and really the easiest way to do that is to give people the chance to prepare the best for that, for their segment, if that makes sense. Another thing which is so important is you need to choose a space with as little or no distraction as possible. Have you ever had a meeting with someone where when you're sitting with them, they're facing and they're looking at the operation, and you get half of their attention and the other half is directed at something else that's happening? It's impossible to get their consciousness. So in the same way, you want to create an environment or have an environment when you're doing the podcast or the interview, whatever it might be, where they can give full consciousness to what you're asking them and the answer that they give. And then the last one I just want to really emphasize here is the importance of being natural and authentic in how you speak to the microphone or how you speak in the podcast versus how you normally speak. I believe that people connect with authentic. They connect if they feel that it's real. They don't connect if it's sounding like it's put on or if it's not really you. So be true to yourself. And I think that's something which we find has been very well received in terms of doing it in a conversational way, and doing it in a way that people can actually relate to. So recording the podcast, getting it together is one thing, but the real challenge in doing this really comes in when we start doing and looking at the editing of the podcast. Now, this is something that for the last 4 years I've actually taught myself to do, and I can tell you firsthand that it's a challenge, but it's certainly doable. So the key thing when it comes to editing a podcast is you've always got to think with the end user in mind. You've got to think, is this captivating? Is this compelling? Is this something which people are actually still wanting to listen to? And inevitably, I mean, our podcast, for example, can be up to an hour and a half long. So I know full well that there are going to be little lulls here and there. But if the general theme of the podcast is compelling, then, that's something we're happy with. But at the same time, you've got to ask yourself, why am I doing this? What is this? What purpose is this episode serving? And making sure that how you edit your podcast is reflective of that. So some of the things that I don't have time to go into today, but I'll mention briefly, is how, for example, you make sure that the sound levels in your episode remain the same throughout. Because what I find sometimes in unprofessional podcasts is you'll have one person speaking and the sound will be through the roof. The next person speaks and you've actually got to turn the volume up or down on your whatever you're listening it on, because the other volume is so different. So in that we use something called a normalizing filter, so that it actually, if you see on the screen in front of you, you'll see the sound waves, and it actually equals everything out, so that you don't get that variance in the volume from one to the next. Okay, you'll learn about things, and if we do an opportunity to go do more of a deep dive, we'll learn about things like high pass filters and things like that, where you can make sure that we don't have any volatility in the pitches, so that you often hear when someone gives a heavy P to it or a high pitched note, that it'll make a sound in your earphone. So making sure that those little attention to detail elements are looked after is what gets people again into the podcast and feeling like it's something professional, much like a professionally done video or any other content that you've put out in the past.
Rob?
Yeah, jump in.
So I see you had Audacity there, which I think is quite a common one that you can get at. Is that one that you recommend for this? I mean, there are numerous softwares out there, but I know Audacity is quite reachable by the general public. What is your opinion?
It's a fantastic... Yeah, Robbie, it's a good question and a fantastic one to start with. The feature set is more than sufficient. It gives you the opportunity to integrate, music. You've got all the filters you need, so it's certainly one which is going to do the job in the interim. And then once you move to maybe a bigger or better stage in your podcasting kind of journey, then you can look at something else. But I mean, for many podcasters, it's still the one of choice, and it's free. So
can you do multiple tracks on this or not?
You can. Yeah, you can do multiple. When I was still using Audacity, we had 6 or 7 layers on one, because you've got you've got your intro music, you've got your 2 channels. So just for those who are unfamiliar, your channel will be, for example, I will be one channel in my mic, and Robbie will be another channel on his mic, for example, if we're having separate mics. So, that gives that versatility of being able to do that.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, Audacity and the editing is one thing we could spend a whole episode on, just on that, because there's so many little things here and there that I've learned over time, and literally just through trial and error. So just playing around with stuff, just learning what works, what doesn't work, especially on the filters. But 2 that I can recommend quickly, Robbie, if you are using it, is compressor and normalize. Those 2 as things help a lot, just to make sure that.
When I did my radio show in Portugal, we used to have something similar to this, but obviously that was quite old school compared to what there is now.
It's incredible what is available in an open source format these days. Just remarkable what people are willing to put out there. So guys, just to move to the next part of the journey, which is once you've actually compiled your episode and it's ready. And if you remember back to the days, and again I'm dating myself here, but the MP3 kind of format that we used to listen to. Once your MP3 or your audio file is ready, it's now a case of where does it go, right? And this is where you see things like what you see in front of you right now. And what this is called is essentially a podcast hosting platform. And what a podcast hosting platform really is it's a place where you store essentially a library of your episodes. So we use something called Podbean, which you see there as an example. There's quite a few different options here. And this is something which you subscribe to on a yearly basis. And really, this is a place where your audio files are hosted. So I'll just give you a quick example of what that looks like for us. But this is the hosting site for us. And when you go onto that site, you'll see all of our episodes. And they've got really nice themes of how that looks, both in the PC format as well as the mobile-friendly format. Now, what the great thing is here, guys, is that, yes, your membership could either listen here, or here's the real exponential growth of podcast, is that not only does your podcast go to that site, automatically that site links to what you see on your phone, which is either Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, whatever you actually use to listen to your content. Now, when I release an episode, I don't have to do anything other than upload it to what we use, which is Podbean. Once it goes there, it automatically sends it out for us to about 20 different platforms. Okay? And the power of that is incredible, because I see the analytics and I see immediately where that is going to, who's listening to it, what country, and in some cases, even what the demographic looks like. So that's really cool, because then, what it looks like in that sense is, if I show you here, this is what our podcast looks like on Spotify. Now, this is not something that we've done. This is automatically what it gets represented like on Spotify, right? And in the same case in Apple Podcasts or Amazon or wherever it might be, Stitcher, right? And that's fantastic, because it's minimal work, but once I've done the groundwork, it's all there and it's all ready. And again, you might have a member who likes Apple Podcasts. You might have a member who likes Spotify. You might have a member who prefers SoundCloud. And we're covering all of our bases. So it's almost like, imagine you recording a video, and if you pressed upload, it automatically went to Supersport. It automatically went to, bless them, SABC. It automatically went to, ESPN, or whatever the case might be. And you weren't doing anything more than just uploading it to one place. So there is amazing opportunity to reach a global audience in that way. And you might think, well, what is a global audience relevant to us where we are as a club? But remember that tourism's coming back. It's not going to go away forever. People are going to come back from other places in the world, and they, if they've already connected with you as a club through a podcast, where are they going to go? They're going to want to find out more. They're going to want to go to the club. They're going to want to see what this whole thing's about. So I believe there's an immense power in starting to tell that narrative before the fact for the people that aren't members when it comes to the podcasts. So just to sum up very quickly, guys, from our side, how we work, and just to give you a sense of what that context looks like, we would typically start by curating a content plan with the club to say, what is it that we want to achieve? What is the purpose of this? How do we make this happen? And how do we reflect it in our content plan, so that we're not going ad hoc kind of, okay, let's do this month, let's do that month. Ooh, that person's got time, let's use that person's time there. There's got to be a strategy, there's got to be a plan, and how we look to replicate this or to reflect it in the episode, and making sure that we're covering our bases in terms of the time that we have for every episode. What we then do is we make sure that the individuals are actually briefed. So if we're speaking to the golf director, if we're speaking to the food and beverage manager, if we're speaking to a waiter, actually for one of our clients, Sportsman's Warehouse, 2 days ago, we've got something called Culture Champions. So every month we interview one of the guys who works in the store as a culture champion, because he's done great work in the store, and he gets the platform to tell us about his story, and that goes out to over 1,000 staff in the within their company, as a form of recognition to say thank you for the work that he's done. And through that, again, there's that opportunity to really tell a narrative that people don't hear in other opportunities. So briefing the people, as I said before, briefing the individuals so that they know what to bring to the table or bring to the engagement is absolutely vital. What we will then do is we'll compile all of those raw files, all of those recordings, and we will go to our software and we will start to compile that episode. But what we also then do is we handhold the process with the team at the club to say, how do we teach you to do this, so that at a point we let go of the reins and you carry on, and you've acquired the skills to be able to actually learn how to record and edit yourself. Because ultimately that's where the power is. You don't want to be in the hands of someone else doing it all the time. You want to obviously learn that skill, and it's a wonderful skill to develop. So once the episodes are approved and once everyone's happy with that, we then upload that to our hosting site, Podbean, as I said, and then automatically within a couple of minutes that is sent out to those various sites. What you might have noticed if you've ever clicked on one of the links that I've put out onto our social media, we use something called FanLink. And what FanLink is, it's an amazing thing, because what you do is you have all the links of all of your platforms, right? So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc., all on one page. So you just put out that one link onto social media, and actually what then happens is that depending on what that person's preferred profile or platform is, they then just click on whatever one they prefer to listen to. So again, convenience for the listener is absolutely key there. So that really brings me to any questions. I don't know if that has, or I hope that shed some light on what this whole environment is all about and what podcasting is, and yeah, I'd love to hear any questions that you guys have to ask on any of the subject matter we've spoken about.
Rob, cost of setting up a small mixer with microphones, is that necessary, or do you just plug, what are we plugging mics into, and quality of microphone?
Good question, Robbie, and I can tell you that, so we've been doing this for 4 years and we don't even have a mixer. So what I do is I've got 2 mics that we plug into phones, and this is before COVID. So we'll go to a club or we'll go to a client, and because we're mobile, we use 2 phones. So sometimes even the phone of the client, but we've got 2 smartphones. We've got 2 lapel mics which we plug into the phone, and the sound quality is absolutely perfect. And we use those as 2 channels, and we're able to record that and then put it into software.
And then you put those together and edit that through your sound software, such as Audacity or whatever it is.
100% right. Yeah. Of course, you can go the mixer route, and the best place to look at that is Takelot. I can send some recommendations for that, and yes, that does make things slightly easier, especially if you're recording in the same place very often. But in our case, we've got to be mobile, so we can't really have what I would call a set rig to do that, but a lot of places do, and obviously the quality is also fantastic then. But we've even recorded off Zoom. The thing to remember, if you are going to do it on Zoom, is make sure you have the setting changed to original sound quality, and not the. So what Zoom have is they have some compressor and mixers built in, and it's like noise cancelling software that they have built in, and that actually deteriorates the sound. So just make sure that you put it on original sound.
Okay, cool.
Rob, it's Mornay from Beaconwood.
How's it, Mornay?
You mentioned in the beginning 7. Every person will listen to 7 podcasts a week. I take it that's a global stat. Do we have any stats on South African listeners or podcast listeners?
Yeah, great question, Monet. You know, the truth is that it's so new in South Africa that those are being compiled at the moment, and I think they will be available within the year. But it's, you know, they need critical mass of data, and at the moment it's in the pipeline, but it's not a critical mass just yet to give an accurate summation. But you know, the thing to note there is that we typically follow the global trend, don't we? So, you know, if you go and look at American stats, for example, within good time, you know, that's going to be the trend that we follow. And I think, you know, I can say that very confidently because that's really been the precedent that's set in the past. So yeah, I would certainly say that it's there's no. We've asked quite a few of our listeners, what is the, you know, how many do you listen to, or how many kind of podcasts do you subscribe to? And as I said earlier, 7 is on the conservative side. So, you know, even if every club all of a sudden had a podcast, I don't think that would be a problem in terms of, you know, that you're diluting. You feel like you're in a diluted space or a saturated space rather. Yeah, there's certainly space for everyone, if I can put it that way.
Then, so you mentioned earlier also some of your podcasts are hour and a half long. I mean, that's obviously relevant to, you know, how interesting it is and the content that you put together for that podcast. Are there any indications of like a minimum or maximum or average timeline for a podcast?
Yeah, again, very good question. It really depends on the nature of the content. And I think, to be honest with you, sometimes it's a case of trial and error and watching what your drop-off looks like. So what you'll see on your podcast hosting site, Podbean being ours, is you can see what drop-off looks like based on time. So typically, you know, you find that people try and err on the side of 30 minutes or less, just a complete general rule. But if you're really getting into, like, for example, if I'm doing a conversation with Mike Leemhuis, which is our most recent one, the actual time of the interview was over 2 hours. So that's from start of the recording to the end. Now, there's literally no much more that I can take out for it not to feel, for it not to feel like there's bits that you can obviously hear that have been taken out, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, you know, for us, I'm not so much worried about time. I'm more worried about whether the content flows and it makes sense and it's of value. But I think trial and error is the best way. I would say, as a rule of thumb, look at a 30-minute maximum to start with.
Good. My last question, Rob, is to Robbie, spoke about cost and so on. But part of that question, you know, what other costs, sort of software? I mean, I suppose I can go and Google it, but what are those costs? And then part of that question also, just estimate time to produce a podcast. I mean, if you don't outsource that function, you want to try and do it, like you said, you guys are trying to train guys to do it themselves. Mm. What is that time to produce a podcast?
So I'll answer the first question first around the costs or additional costs. So your primary cost is the hosting site that you use. So that's a subscription model on a 12-month, you know, 1 year kind of. And what you're looking at there is, you know, give or take roughly about, and it's really little. I mean, we're talking about, I think it's about $2,500 for the year. For the hosting site. So I mean, all things considered, if you pair that up or match it up to other costs of, you know, that potential reach, I don't think you can find something in that bracket. Obviously, you've got tiers within the hosting site that give you more functionality or more analytics, etc. But that is something you can progress to. As Robbie was alluding to earlier, and as I said, with something like Audacity, you're literally starting on a zero base from a cost perspective. Audacity is something that you can go and Google right now, and you can download it in the next minute, and you could start using it straight away. So there is a zero cost factor there. But like anything, and you're alluding to it already, is the cost of time. And, you know, to give you an answer there, the first podcast that I tried to edit, I think took me about, thinking back 3-4 years now, but it probably took me about 3 or 4 hours to do. Okay. I can now edit a podcast in 45 minutes, but that's only because of the time that I've spent being able to go through it and do it. But I think the key thing there is you've got to take that worst case scenario, or yeah, I would say you're looking at 3 to 4 hours per episode as a safe kind of estimation.
Cool. Thanks, Rob.
Pleasure, Morne. Darren, I know you've got 16 questions, so do you want to get cracking?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I had a slightly different thought train, but now after listening to you, it's answered quite a lot of the questions. The one thing, so my initial thought for the podcast was, do we network members with members? So getting your influential members in their personal capacities or work capacities to talk about branding or to talk about success. But now after hearing you talk about the club and how you can sell your club to the members, I still have that train of thought is how do you monetize it and can you commercialize it? Is it worth trying to go down that route, or does that sort itself out once you get a following? Like you mentioned, Joe Rogan makes 30 million. I'm sure he's got brands that want to be associated with it. But for us as a club, would we become more popular the more viewership you get, or would we have to sell a sponsor to it ourselves?
Yeah. Look, Darren, that's you hit the nail on the head already. I think the key or step one is create the following, create I suppose the legitimacy of the podcast. But I have absolutely no doubt, given a captive market, for example, like yours, that in good time you're going to be able to. And this is the other great thing we haven't really touched on today, but as you're alluding to, the potential commercial value there is that you could quite easily start bringing in partners as as ad slots or segments in your podcast. The key thing there, and I'll take, for example, I don't know if you guys listen to something called No Laying Up. They're a podcast out of America. Fantastic content creators for if you really love golf. And what they do is they read their own ads, right? So they'll have Whoop or Precision Pro or whatever, right? The golf equipment stuff, or their big partners, Callaway. So they'll read the Callaway ad, but it won't sound like a boring advert that you've now got to listen to in order to get to the content that you want to hear. So it's in the way you bring it across. But as I said, there's absolutely no doubt of the commercial potential there. Get the MVP out first. So the first couple of episodes, I would say, get out without any ads. Have that as a test case for your potential partners, and then be able to bring them in, in slots, in predetermined slots once that's up and running.
Okay. And then also just like managing the people that you do interview. Is there some sort of trend that you'll get more traction on certain topics, or like obviously golf is loved within our club, but like you say, there's a No Laying Up podcast. So if I now had to try and talk about golf stuff, I wouldn't be as credible as someone like No Laying Up. So like
Sure.
you had Mike Learmace on, and I mean for us in the golf industry, that's a big name, so it's quite a draw card. And so is there some sort of key into who you partner with, and can you almost shoot yourself in the foot if the person's bigger than the club or bigger than you?
Yeah.
Type of thing,
Yeah, Darren, again, I like the question, and the answer to that is that, we get sucked into this thing about chasing numbers, right, on podcasts. We get sucked into the thing of chasing, like, okay, I had this many listeners. I don't think the objective or the key success factor is the number. It's the actual person who's listening, right? It's the consciousness with which they listen. So if you're going to convert 10 people to come play more golf, right, and I'm just using a number 10, as opposed to having 100 people listen, right? But there's no conversion of those 100 people. Then which one do you want? Yeah. If you know what I mean. So I think it's about going narrow and deeper rather than going wider and trying to be everything to everyone. And isn't that the universal principle to us anyway, right? I mean, in any kind of marketing. So I would say don't worry so much about the numbers. Worry about how much the people love that type of content. And again, trial and error. I can promise you that your podcast is going to evolve immensely from the first episode. If I go and listen to my first episode with Chris Bentley, I'll never forget sitting with him in his office. And I was just thinking, I don't even know what I'm going to ask. Like, I'm just going to wing this, you know? And that's where I learned, well, geez, you know, we've got to somehow try and prep this a bit better. Thankfully, he can spin a yarn. So, you know, it worked out okay. But at the same time, the preparation makes it so much easier. So you're gonna play around with segments, and you're gonna throw stuff out. You're gonna bring stuff in, but yeah, just don't be. The thing is with podcasts is that you can put out as many as you want. We could do a podcast every day if we want. You know, Gareth Cliff does a podcast every single day, right? I mean, essentially his show is a podcast. And it doesn't cost him anything more in terms of the cost of the thing, other than his time and obviously getting it recorded.
Yeah. Well, my next question was going to be, when you start off, do you stick to a consistent, like Wednesday morning it's coming out, to try and get consistency, or does that also just put too much pressure on you?
Yeah, thanks for showing me up here, but that's certainly something which, yeah, because we are not podcasters in terms of our profession, I've always taken the view that this is going to be an added value layer to grow our brand. If I can do this can do a couple now, I'm going to do it, and if I can't, we'll put it and we'll. But it's certainly the studies have shown that a regular posting, especially if you've got like a member base, for example, that definitely creates increased listenership. So I would certainly advocate that.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I think you covered all my other questions in the presentation.
I hardly believe that. Cool. No problem. Talani, I'm sure, I don't know if Talani's there, but I'm sure she must have a question.
She was here. She's just stepped out now.
Okay.
Not
Let's
sure
see
where
who else is there. Crystal, Candice. Where's Marzan? Where is she from? Charles?
I actually have no idea, Matthew.
Stellenbosch.
Stellenbosch.
Okay. Well, that's closer to home. I'll just go knock on her door.
Rob, I've got a question. Have you guys tried vodcasts?
Great question, Matt. And it's the kind of evolution of I suppose the audio version. So what you're noticing, and you've probably asked it because you see more podcasters having a YouTube version of what they do, is it? I think it's a great addition, but it's certainly something which you shouldn't be too hasty to do. So what is cool, and I'll tell you what we've done, is I will take a segment out of the podcast, because typically now we're doing a lot of them on Zoom. All right. So what you do is you take a segment out, and I did this with Mike's one, and I encourage you to listen to that one because it's about difficult members, and it's the story about Michael Jordan, which he had at Congressional Country Club. So Michael Jordan rocked up, and he wanted to become a member, and he wanted to play, and he was in basically basketball kit, not the code of conduct that Congressional kind of promotes. And how his golf director handled that situation was phenomenal. So that was a segment that we took out and we put onto our YouTube channel just as a segment of it. But you get a lot of places that do the full version on both. And look, I mean, I'll take, for example, I love a podcast called The Good, Bad and Rugby, which is a GBNR. It's a rugby podcast. And their YouTube version is, I think, better than their audio version, because they've got characters and they're funny, and you see the reactions and things like that, right? So I think it's horses for courses, to be honest. But Zoom has made that very easy. And on your last thing to say, Matt, on your podcast hosting site, so automatically for us, Podbean posts the version of it to YouTube. So you can actually listen to it on there. The only challenge therein is the fact that that's the audio version. So what we'll do is that we'll, over and above that, we'll post the Zoom version onto YouTube if we want to, basically.
Do you get more of a viewing with the vodcasts, or like, for instance, that Mark Learmas thing you guys did? We gave it a watch in the office. It was amazing. Did you get a bit of an uptake in there? Was there, I don't know, maybe a vodcast could appeal to another kind of listener to increase your kind of base?
Look, the thing is that we use mostly a lot of that content in our actual e-learning streams. So
Okay.
what we do is we'll take stuff like that. So I'm not really worried and interested in about how many hits it gets on YouTube. I'll put it out there, and if people watch it, great. But it's not my key success factor. So I don't push it. I'll push it. We'll put it out once on social media and we'll leave it. But we're not trying to build a rhythm of people watching the YouTube channel for that. It's more if you're interested in that, you search it and that comes up. That's an entry point into chatting to us if you want to use any of our services. But yeah, so I think you've got to know why if you're chasing hits and if you're chasing, those kinds of things, then by all means. But as I said to Darren, for me, it's more about the quality of the listener. So if I can get the right listener listening, I mean, we're a B2B, right? We're not a B2C. So we're business to business. It's not about the numbers. It's about the person who's listening.
No, that makes sense. I think it's quite clever that you take out a segment and you almost use that as like a marketing thing. You take out a really good segment like your one with Mike Learmace and you punt it. Because that can just kind of elude people to the podcast.
Yeah.
It's quite a nice way of doing
Another little trick to do, we do it sometimes, is we'll take a segment out of the podcast, like a really cool, like maybe sometimes a bit of an edgy kind of segment, and we'll put that right at the beginning as a little like sound clip in the beginning with the music that's playing. So like I did it in the beginning with Mike, and then Mike shat on me and said you can't tell them too much about Michael Jordan, otherwise he's going to get in trouble. So I had to take it out. But it's a great thing to go, ooh, geez, what I want to hear that. You get that sometimes with the more entertainment driven stuff. It's something that I've picked up from there. But it gets people, as you said, Matt, it gets people excited. So Roxanne, you've obviously got a number of different very high level questions, so please fire away.
I'm good for now, thanks.
No, you see, that's just me trying to keep everyone conscious.
Come on, Roxanne's been the superstar of the podcast of late with Ladies Month. I mean, come on, Roxy.
Exactly. CMASA's a celebrity.
She is a celebrity.
Very, very humble in her ways.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, Charles, I don't know if there were any other questions, but I think most people on this thing have got my details. So if there's anything that follows, by all means, please send it through. And if we can help with any of the process, then always happy to.
Rob,
can I just ask from
you answered that with more than I already, so that's good.
Cool. Sorry, Robbie, you had a question?
So just from the CMASA side, and I'm not sure what the deal is here for the guys who are on board here. Are you saying that you're offering a service to clubs to sort of kickstart their podcast service? I mean, we don't do it here, but we actually, funny enough, we were discussing it a couple of weeks ago with Crystal. So are you sort of offering a service to kickstart?
Yeah, look, as I said earlier, we don't want to be, we're not in the game of podcasting in terms of creating content for clients. We see it as an opportunity to handhold and teach guys how to do it. So we typically go through about a 6-month process, and I can send you the info if you like, Robbie, but just to help the clubs actually understand how to get going with the podcast, how to register everything, how to get everything going, how to record the episodes, etc. And once you feel like you've got the reins, then you can run with it. So we've helped 1 or 2 clubs with it, as I said, on roughly about a 6-month program, sometimes shorter, sometimes longer, depending on how comfortable they feel. And then once they can go with it, they run with it.
Okay.
So
Cool.
I'll send you.
Sorry,
Yeah,
Rob,
no,
just one more. So we normally do Q&As as a sort of member engagement evening. Would you advise doing a podcast on something like that, or if you've got an audience, does it make it really difficult to edit it and reuse that content?
Yeah, look, I mean, it always is going to come down to the audio quality. So if you've got, if you mean like Q&A in terms of a big group of people, is that what you mean? Like if there's a...
Yeah, so we'd normally have, like for the Bryanston function, we'd have a guest celebrity and we'd ask them a couple questions, open up to the floor. They'd ask a few questions. So either we'd do that as a Facebook video, but I think there's a good opportunity to use that content.
100%. So in our internal podcasts that we do for our learning platforms and things like that, we always record any live sessions that we do through the same thing I said to Robbie with the mic that attaches to the mobile phone, so a lapel mic. And what I would suggest is whenever you're doing those, I'll send you the link where you can get those mics. They, I think, about $850 off Take a Lot, and you get one or two of those, and then all you do is that every time that you have a Q&A or anything like that, you just make sure you record both channels, and then it's easy to upload it as edit it and upload it as a podcast.
And do you move the mic to the person, or do you set up a podium and the person just steps up and moves to the mic?
Yeah, look, I mean, you could. What I would do, and I know it's not perfect, but you know, with a mic, as I assume the mic is connected to the audio system in the room, right? It will be tricky to integrate that, because remember that these mics are digital mics, so it's not going into a compressed. It's not a it's a digital version. So the best way to do that would be to literally take a mobile phone just as a short term, if you can't get a lapel to them, and just let them speak into the mobile phone as a recording, as a voice note. Otherwise, I would have that lapel mic and just give it to them when they ask the question.
Okay.
And then just make sure it's recording. But the issue there that I find sometimes when people are doing Q&As in a big space is that it sounds very tinny. So you want to get, you just want to make sure that quality is good enough so that when it comes through on the podcast, because remember, the people can't see the environment, they can only listen.
Yeah.
So all they have is that audio quality.
But my biggest fear is to advertise it and to listen out for it, and I cut out all the members' questions because of bad audio, and it's only my questions. I don't think I'll be too popular with them.
Yeah, look, I mean, to Matt's question a little bit earlier, that would be a very cool way to do, perhaps do a vlog style, where what you can do is then the question is in the form of a text on the screen. So you replicate the question as a text, and then you can have the person answering it perhaps in a video format, something like that. Or you just do the mic thing like I said before. But we can, Darren, we can troubleshoot that directly. So I'll chat to you about it in our next catch up, and we can, there's an easy way around that.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
Well, here's a question from Cedric. What is
Cedric,
the mic
yeah.
called?
The mic that I was just speaking about?
Yeah.
I must just double check. Let me just give me 1 sec quickly. I'm trying to see.
You got to. Can't see it.
The one that I've got in front of me is a Samsung. The one that you can see on the screen. But that's not the one I'm talking about. The one that's, I'm just going to quickly show it to you on screen here. I don't know if you can see it through my very real background. No, you can't.
No, you
It's called Boya, B-O-Y-A, and it's essentially it's a long lapel mic that actually connects into. So we use iPhones, but the connection, I don't know if you can see that, but the connection into the port is actually an iPhone, straight into how you charge your phone. So that connects into the port that you charge your phone off, and then it's essentially a lapel mic that you connect to your speaker, to the person. Yeah, and it's incredibly simple. You literally record off your voice recorder on your phone. But the key thing there, and as I said earlier, is the editing software that you use to make sure that all the levels are the same.
Yeah, Candice also says that Boya and Rode are the best, depending on available budget.
Yeah, those are two reputable brands. I mean, there certainly isn't just one. Thanks, Candice. Yeah, you can use whatever whatever you're happy to spend on it. But there's quite a variance. If you Take a Lot's the easiest place to look at for those. They've got quite a nice spectrum of things. Cool.
Any other questions, guys? Well, we've got Rob here, willing and waiting.
Rob, just regards to like flow of the conversation and everything, do you find it easier to do it over Zoom or physically going to a club?
Zoom was difficult in the beginning, but it certainly, I think people have got into the rhythm of Zoom a lot better. And again, it's you've always remember when you record Zoom, it records for you on a video format and an audio format, right? So you can always edit out any parts that are. I for example, and Dell won't mind me saying this, but I did an interview with Dell Hayes a while ago. You guys, some of you might have listened to it, and I'm still going to give Dell a hard time about this, but he sometimes takes a long time to answer a question. So the person who was doing the edit for that one, there were so many moments of dead time in the audio that if we left that, you might have been thinking like it was basically like Madiba. Madiba like takes hours between words. For him, it's quite effective. For Dale, it's less so. But he, so that's something where you edit and the flow becomes a lot easier. But yeah, look, you can achieve a lot in the edit, and I think it's more a case of the key thing for me, Matt, is the natural way of asking questions. I think if you make the person feel at ease in how you're asking the questions, so they can answer it naturally themselves, and it's also something you develop and you get better at, I guess. That's the key thing. It's the worst thing is those transactional interviews where you ask a question, the person answers, and then the next thing is completely non-related to whatever the person just answered.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You get those types of and that doesn't flow. So you've got to actually be conscious about what the person is saying. It's not like a 1-step, 2-step, 3-step thing. It's you've got to have some kind of I always say to my guests, here's the question list. Treat it as a guideline, because I can promise you we're not going to follow this list, 1 to 10.
And of course you get the people with one answers, yes, no.
Those are the best,
maybe,
Robbie.
Maybe. Sheepers don't you love them? My word.
You just make damn sure you don't ask them a closed question, because jeepers, they'll make an open-ended question and a closed one very fast.
But some people are like that, unfortunately. I mean, you must have experienced it as well. Some people are just like that, and you have to move on with somebody else. Just
Yeah, for those of my friends that use that platform called Tinder, it's like a it's like when you realize you're sitting at the table and this isn't going to work. Oh damn! Sorry, I have to go fetch my friend at the airport. I'll see you. I'll catch you soon. So you try and cut the interview as short as you can. Those are the ones I promise you, Mornay, it won't be an hour and a half. So longer intro.
Yeah.
But I think we've been very lucky, Robbie. Our guests have had a lot to share. I've actually got Mr. Santa Claus on this Friday, so interesting to hear his story. He always struggles to get his point across,
But Liesel is like that.
Yeah, I think I should maybe ask her rather.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's always fascinating. What's the old saying? The teacher learns the most, and I think what's been interesting in the exercise is how much you learn from these guests, and their perspectives and things, especially the stories here and there, the anecdotes. Dale's one, in fact, was I think almost 3 hours. Shock horror. So yeah, there was a lot of stories there, many of which, because we are not so you'll see on especially on Apple Podcasts, it says, do you want it to be a explicit or whatever it's called thing, where if they're swearing and stuff like that, so you need to make that apparent up front. And there were 1 or 2 stories which wouldn't have gotten through the Apple Podcasts filter, so we had to make sure that those were left out. I'll send you the unedited version if you like. Cool. All right. Yeah, guys, anything else? Charles, you happy with that?
Very happy. Thank you so much, Rob. You answered a lot of questions here. It's great. Interesting topic.
No problem. Yeah, it is interesting. Interesting to see where it's going to go in the future. I think, it's going to evolve. To Darren's question around, what works and what doesn't, I think we're all still learning. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, Rob, for your time as well. Much appreciated.
Anytime, guys. Have a great day. Have a great week, and I'm sure we'll touch base with all of you quite soon.
Yeah.
Rob, rock and roll, buddy.
Cool. Take care, Robbie.
Thank you,
Thanks, everyone. Cheers, man. Bye.
Bye.